Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. How's your week been, Jess?
Well, last week was pretty quiet. We had a tube strike here in London. So I don't know. There were some pretty funny videos. Apparently it was like the Hunger Games out on the Lime bikes. Like trying to get a Lime bike was you were taking your life into your hands. Like there were just herds of people on Lime bikes. But luckily I did not have to go anywhere. I was able to work from home. But I've had quite the morning, Kyle, because I don't know if you remember a couple weeks ago, I was talking about this piece of furniture that I was tracking across the Atlantic.
It made it.
It arrived. It arrived this morning at 5 a.m.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was substantially heavier than I was anticipating because it was in packing crates, like full on pallets and stuff. So I spent a good hour and a half this morning taking apart a pallet. And so what you can't see behind me for anyone who is on video is I have an enormous amount of crates behind me, like piles of wood.
That's good wood. You got to use
well, I was thinking I was going to maybe put it on Facebook Marketplace and see if someone wants to take it away for free.
It's a great idea. A second life for that crate.
Exactly. How's your week been?
Yeah, good. Went up to the cabin for some camping,
nice.
It's kind of near Death Valley area, if anyone's kind of familiar with that, lowest point in the US. But had a couple injuries, a couple of bits of excitement, but everyone came out okay. No, it was a close call, but no digits were lost. Let's just put it that way.
God, that's really bad.
But it was nice to unplug for a bit. I definitely encourage everyone to get out of the hamster wheel every once in a while and get out in nature.
There we go. As long as you keep all of your fingers attached.
Yeah, make sure all those digits come back with you.
Oh my God, that is not great. Right. On that note, let's get into it. So today we are bringing you part 2 of our interview with Eric Callahan, who is absolutely brilliant at making data accessible and actionable for small businesses. And as a quick reminder, as always, you can find us on socials. We are at early_adopter on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So make sure to follow and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It does really help us.
But before we jump back into our conversation with Eric, let's do a quick recap of what we covered in part 1, because honestly, Eric shared so much useful information that every small business owner really needs to hear about their data so they can really get the most out of AI.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, Eric really, I think, did a good job destroying the myth that small businesses don't have enough data, because as he told us, if you've ever sent a Google form, if you've ever made a phone call, or you've tracked any sort of business interaction, you have data in some way, shape, or form.
And he kept coming back to this fundamental question that should guide everything. And I really like this question where you start with, which is, what business question are you trying to answer? So instead of collecting data for the sake of collecting data, which, apparently even massive enterprises can be guilty of, you need to start with what you actually want to know about your business.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples that I forced him to tell this story because I liked it so much, is his PTA hot dog story, because I think it really just illustrates how even well-meaning people can create a data nightmare by setting up multiple collection forms without thinking through the process. So, in this particular instance, they had Google Forms, they had physical paper slips that were handed out to the kids. They had email RSVPs all for the same school barbecue. And it just turned into a nightmare. So I just really liked that because I thought it was a great way of illustrating that it doesn't matter if you're in a business or if you're doing the school barbecue, everything is data collection.
And I think that story is a perfect analogy for what happens in businesses. Whether you're that 5-person PTA committee or, a small business or a multinational corporation, it translates to you have lots of different ways that a person can interact with your business. There's a lot of different touch points within your funnel. And so that same data problem will exist. Siloed systems, inconsistent collection methods, and really nobody thinking about how it all comes together downstream, and then how you actually would measure it if it came to that.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. We also discussed the shift left methodology, which essentially boils down to instead of constantly cleaning up messy data after the fact, you take 5 minutes up front at the start of the process when you're setting things up to think about the process. And that 5-minute investment can really save you hours of headaches later on, especially once you start layering AI on top of that data.
Remember, with the AI systems that we're using, having data be available is super critical. Those upstream data quality issues get amplified with large language models. So if you're feeding messy data into machine learning models or the LLMs, you're going to get garbage outputs. I think, Jess, that's one of your favorite sayings: garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage out. Yep.
Exactly. So getting your data house in order isn't just nice to have anymore. It's actually essential for AI success.
Yeah, and I think the most practical takeaway that Eric left us with was really simple. It's just audit your pain points. Look for places where you're cleaning the same data over and over again, and ask yourself if you can prevent that problem at the source instead of constantly fixing it downstream.
So with that context, let's dive back into our conversation with Eric, where we explored data hygiene, why AI isn't actually magic, and do a deep dive into how Spotify Wrapped works. Plus, Eric is going to share a pretty hilarious AI gone wrong story that I think the audience will enjoy.
I agree. Right. We are welcoming back our guest, Eric Callahan. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you are the data guy?
Oh, good question. I am I'm Eric. I've been doing this stuff for like about 15 plus years at this point. And I have kind of had the luckiness to sort of see this from all different vantage points, from the data side, from the analytics side, from the data engineering side. So yeah, I guess you can call me the data guy because I kind of have been able to see all the entire process of data sort of from birth to consumption. And yeah, that's me.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about where you've been in the past?
Yeah, so I spent my first 10 years or so in big corporations, Amex, Wyndham Worldwide, Barclays Card. So lots of different types of corporations. So finance, hospitality, you name it. But at the end of the day, everyone has to have sort of the same problems. So after that, though, I went to startups, spent a bunch of time at Pickaxe Foundry, which is where Jess and I met. And yeah, did a lot of consulting there, helping small businesses, big businesses. So yeah, different situations, similar problems.
So Eric, something else I wanted you to talk us through, your duct tape analogy. Can you walk us through that a little bit? Because I think that's a really interesting concept and quite a useful thing for startups to be aware of.
One of the things that I remember hearing or reading a while ago, I don't remember what it is, but had pointed to Netflix as one of the first like tech native companies that actually built a tech product and said, like, we're starting from scratch as a tech company. Therefore, everything that we do, and when we build our foundation and we have tech in mind and we're thinking about data structures and things like that, right? But all companies that were around before that, really, and a lot of older companies have been around 100 years, right? So not even necessarily just small businesses, but they were built sort of before everything was digital. And so they weren't necessarily built on foundations for collecting data that were digital. And so as digital things became came about, they had two options. They said, we can try to like slap this onto our existing infrastructure and business model, or we can just like rip everything apart and start over. And guess how many did B? I think Netflix was like the first, probably like early 2000s was one of the first companies that said like, we are going to start from scratch and not have to deal with this problem of legacy systems. We're going to start from scratch in like a digital native way and build all and collect all of our data in such a way that we are able to be digital. And I know there's the whole like DVD thing, which was not exactly exactly the same, but they weren't blockbusters. So but a lot of companies that are big corporations that have been around 100 years were thinking of running their business. They had ran successful businesses for 90 years before digital stuff came around. And so as these things started creeping up, they were probably thinking like, all right, well, maybe this is a stat. Who knows? I'm not going to rip apart my entire business structure. So they would duct tape here, and then like, oh, email's a thing now. Fine, I guess we'll duct tape this thing also. And then as legacy parts of the business fall off, you just have a big ball of like lots of duct tape stick together now, and that's your business now.
What's interesting is with a startup, I don't want to say it's not as big of a deal for you to, start from scratch and build in a digitally native way, but there's less approval processes, all of those things to kind of get to the point where you can make your data useful.
That's for sure. I mean, I think like ideally, right, option 3 is that you just start thinking this way, like when you start your business, again, back to the 5 minutes to thank myself later sort of thing. And obviously like if a startup has already started, like great, fine, you're not toast. Like as Jess said, like you can just kind of think about how can I reset a little, do maybe like a little soft reset of figuring out how I collect things and structure things. But if you're a new startup and you're about to start off, like do this first, right? So that you don't have this headache. I don't know if it's too jargony just to say tech debt. But
yeah, I think it is.
Tech debt. Is it? Okay. Sorry. What is
tech debt?
Tech debt is basically when you build something a certain way to sort of get to a fast answer for something or get something launched, but you built it in such a way that it's not going to scale and you have to undo it later to then grow. And it's very duct taping. Like
it's almost like it's almost like making a prototype and then just using that prototype rather than actually going back.
Exactly. And saying like, okay, well, this thing worked for our launch test, so let's just keep using it. Even though you know that you really can't do that, but it's easier, right? Because no one wants to do is say, okay, we're going to take like a month and a half to just do nothing new and add new products. And I had there's a company that a digital company that I follow and use that did something sort of similar to this. It's a product I really like, and they took about 3 months where they didn't ship any new features. And I've read a tweet by the founder who said like, you guys are great to the users. They were like, you have grown so fast that we were not anticipating this, and we had to basically like rebase our entire systems to keep up with you you monsters and how fast you're consuming this product, which is great, but like also maybe you should have thought about that in the first place, like before building something.
Every startup I've encountered, been a part of, there is a ton of technical debt. And of course, and what you end up getting is the management team never wants to basically allow for sprints to do tech debt, because in their head they're like, well, it's working, let's just keep going for new features. And that tech debt can be like a snowball, right? I mean, you get to a point down the road where now you can't even do anything. You can't do new features because you're so limited by what you have in the system.
Absolutely.
Well, the reason I wanted you to tell the duct tape story was because I think what would be really interesting is it's to identify how you spot that duct tape. How do you know when there's an issue that has been duct taped together?
If you're a big enough company, ask your data engineers. They'll tell you right away.
But what if you're not?
If you're not, I mean, I think a lot of it is manual processes, right? Do you have something where you sit down and you say, this thing is not scalable. If I want to grow my business, I can't do it like this again. Then you've duct taped something. And it's fine if you did. Again, like you had to get something out the door or whatever. But again, with some of the companies I'm advising, I'm talking to them and some of their BI things, they're telling me like, oh yeah, like if I want to make a dashboard, like I have to just, go to Facebook and see how many followers I have and then write it into this spreadsheet and email it around. Or so if you're doing a lot of manual stuff, and you think to yourself, like, I don't want to be doing this. No human should have to do this. You've probably built some sort of tech debt. If you're doing the same thing over and over and over, you probably have some sort of something that can be automated.
So I was just going to say that was my next question is to bring it back to AI, because obviously this is a podcast about AI. those sorts of things seem like the perfect usage for AI, things that could be automated. I mean, that's a little bit more kind of a workflow thing, but like, surely that's a good use case.
Yeah, for sure. If you can get AI to help you with some of those menial tasks, agents maybe, absolutely, that's a great place to do it. And not have to do it again.
Yeah. I think the one that I see most common is when if you're exporting into Excel at any point, that's usually some tech debt. And unfortunately, last week we were talking about, hey, export some information to Excel and have AI analyze it. We might have unknowingly created some tech debt for people.
Oh no.
But we did also talk about, how you might utilize APIs as you get, more sophisticated. So we also have given you the path to get out of your tech debt. Maybe your Fridays now are from here on out going to be your tech debt days. But yeah, that I typically see that with businesses. There's some sort of manual process where data is getting exported to Excel, and then you're trying to transform and do something with it. That I think is a really good indicator for people that you've got some duct tape and that you should try to solve that. Okay. Sure. So we've been talking a lot about different data, and we've kind of highlighted or talked about, the data mess that can happen. So Eric, why don't you talk to us a little bit about data hygiene? We're using all of these systems. We've talked about that. We are trying to track all of, these interactions that are happening around our business. That is inevitably going to lead to a data mess or, a lot of disparate systems not maybe talking to each other, manual processes here and there. So talk to us about, what is data hygiene and, how does it happen and maybe how people can spot it? And then what are some fixes around it?
I think data hygiene is a very I want to say scary term, but for some people, data hygiene, data governance, they kind of go a little bit hand in hand. So for our purposes, I'll hit the jargon button on myself, Jess, before we start this. So when I think of these things, I think of data governance as is the right sort of data, does it even exist? Are the values correct? Are the right people seeing it? Is it a PII? That's what I think as far as data governance. Data hygiene, I think of more as personal hygiene, right? Is the data clean? And an example could be where someone's could have the name John Smith, and someone else could be J Smith, and someone else could be John S. Right. And someone else could be John no space Smith, and someone else could be John Smith spelled wrong, right? And that's five different examples of something that should be the same thing. Yeah. And that's data hygiene. Yeah. As far as ways to correct it, honestly, one of the good things is that there are a lot of tools out there. I know we talked about 58 tools. Well, a 59th could be what we call data observability tool. There's lots of these out there now that do a really great job of doing things like telling you, are there new values that you didn't expect? So I could tell it, I expect to see John Smith, and it can say, okay, well, I see J Smith, I see these other four. And you can say, oh, thank you for telling me, let's go correct it. So there's lots of tools out there. However, again, if you're a startup and you don't have money for fancy tools, a lot of these have free tiers. Sorry,
we
guys,
we love a free tier.
Yeah, a lot of data observability governance tools out there that have free tiers. If you're small, but there's also there's some things you can do yourself, right? You can set up little things like queries that tell you what are the values that are coming in from this thing, and maybe you could, depending on how savvy you are, you can set up Slack alerts or something like that can tell you, oh, this thing that I was not expecting to come in has come in now. Let's say that you're a company, you're using Google Forms only, right? And all of your data is coming into to a backend Google Sheet. You can just do a little chart maybe that says, show me my count of all the different values that are coming in here, and that you should always see 4 bars, right, with different levels, and then one day a 5th bar shows up and you weren't expecting that, and you say, oh, well, it's because someone misspelled something right here, or I wanted it to be red, yellow, and blue, and now all of a sudden orange is coming. I'm like, we don't have an orange product, what's happening here, right? And that's honestly and it's a silly example, but those are the types of things too that when you scale them, and you don't see that oranges come in, and maybe it didn't break anything, right? Maybe it's a new value that came in data, in the data engineering, but now your CEO opens the dashboard tomorrow and he's like, oh, we have an orange product now. That's interesting, right? You don't
That's exactly
have
how they would say it as well.
That's exactly how they would say it. Yeah. and you didn't know that, right? So that's sort of the principle, right? The principle is, are there ways to monitor and like look at these things to make sure that before the CEO sees it, someone else sees it, and that's what a lot of these observability tools are about. Whether it's like a fancy one, or even like we said, if you're just kind of working out of a Google sheet, how do you can build your own little charts and things like that just to stay on top of it.
And I think a good example of that is, if you have a CRM system, a lot of like, if a HubSpot or something like that, a lot of them will show you, where you have missing fields. So in addition to duplicate records around namings, like you're talking about, if you have missing fields, like I would say CRM systems are just notorious, right, for not being great in terms of your record keeping for a lot of different reasons, but they're historically pretty bad. And so, an observability tool, is very helpful in identifying where there's gaps in the data, bad data input, you need like a date form and it's not there. You're missing information like amounts or close dates, which are, super important for the business to forecast, eventual sales. So all of those things can be really helpful, just identifying and trying to clean your data and understand what's missing is super important.
I'm going to give an example that actually happened to me this weekend while I was doing some expenses. And this is pretty manual, but I'm just going to give you the example. I was doing my expenses and I was just uploading CSVs that I had downloaded from my bank account. And one thing I noticed is that some of the vendors were coming up with the individual store number. So you might say, so like Boots is a pharmacy here in the UK. So it would say like Boots 0501 and then Boots 0356 or whatever it was, because that was obviously the store that I had purchased something at. Now, that's not hugely useful for when I'm trying to figure out how much money I'm spending at Boots. So what I did was I just manually changed it to Boots so just Boots as a category rather than the individual stores. So obviously, if you've got huge amounts of data, you can't necessarily do it that manually, but it's just a really easy way of thinking about it, where it was just a small fix, but actually now I'm going to have a much better idea of how much I spend at Boots, which is probably too much.
Yeah. I mean, and look, this whole data hygiene process is not the sexiest of things necessarily, right?
Not.
But just to kind of bring this home for people, because people are probably thinking like, why are we focusing on this? So I looked up some research. Harvard Business Review estimates $3 trillion annually cost the US due to bad data, time wasted, errors, poor decisions, all of those things. So it is a big problem. I think it's probably a hidden cost. And I think, Eric, it goes back to your kind of like your 5-minute upstream conversation. Like, how can you basically make sure that your data is good up front? And then maybe also you might want to talk about what are some of like data validation techniques you can do, or like what are ways that people can keep their systems, having good data? Like what are some things you might do to make sure that data is good throughout a lot of your systems?
I think it circles back to shift left, honestly. Really, and making and the concept of data contracts and just making sure that when things are produced, and like, to be honest, I know that it's not always feasible, right, to say that like every single thing is going to be exactly how we need it. But the idea here is that like you're going to have raw data come in, and so like I know fintechs deal with this example all the time. Jess, the Boots example you gave, right? So the credit card statement has decided that it's going to say Boots 123 and Boots 456. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't call the credit card company and say like, please fix this, right? You can't. But what you can do is you can know that here's how these come in, and here's what we want to do about it. And so like if you're a fintech company and you are maybe an aggregator and you want to make sure that, Jess, when you log in, you know exactly how much you spent at Boots. Maybe the fintech is going to say like, we've got some sort of aggregation layer in here. We're actually smart enough to use, something that combines these and says, here's just what Boots is. Because if you don't bring it back to AI and LLMs, what's going to happen? Or Jess is going to go into her AI chat box and say like, where did I spend the most money this year? And it's going to say, oh, like you spend the most money at Boots 456. You spent like $10 there. And you're going to be like, $10? I spent way more than $10 at Boots. It's because you had like a whole bunch of $9 transactions at these other Boots that add up to $500. But so the AI then becomes untrusted. It's the same exact thing, as a CEO looking at the dashboard and saying this is wrong. Now it's Jess looking at this like stupid chatbot that thinks I only spent $10 at Boots, right? Because the data hygiene was not addressed, and it was not the data was not modeled in a way to be useful for the end user, whether it's the CEO or if it's just talking to her fintech tool. So shift left, as a reminder from last episode, is just this idea that a lot of data hygiene and architecture and structure and collection things can be addressed at sort of the beginning of the flow, much closer to where the data is actually created, instead of having bad data go through the analytics layer and into the reporting layer, and then having to do last minute band-aids at the very last second, being like, oh no, this looks bad, let's fix it here. Just fix it at the beginning.
I think a common misconception is that you can just take AI, put it on top of any type of data, and it's going to fix it and understand it and analyze it. I think that common misconception is pretty pervasive, and it's something I encounter a lot. But in fact, the old principles of bad data in, bad data out is just as important for AI. And in fact, in some ways, as you're pointing out, AI might amplify it, because we're now getting so accustomed to AI knowing everything, we're just going to take that at face value rather than questioning it.
I'm going to say something that's going to make some people sad, but AI is not magic. Really.
We say it all the time. Don't worry.
I'm very sorry if I've told someone that like Santa Claus isn't real or something, but the same principles that have always applied, right? To dashboarding, to predictive modeling, all of these are outputs, right? These are all things that are built on a foundation. Data is your foundation for any data product, any data tool, and your tool, your output is only going to be as good as your input. So BI, it's just an output of your data, which is business intelligence, dashboards, things like that, output of your data. Machine learning models, predictive models, output of your data. AI, it's just another output of your data. It's just words instead of pictures and numbers. Like that's it, right? So if your data is bad, all of those things will be bad. I actually had a fun little talk I did a couple of years ago, and I showed a picture of a tree with like the branches were withering and brown, right? And I showed like people pouring a watering can, and it was a watering can with gold coming out on the branch. And meanwhile, the root was was dying, right? And I was like, no. Instead, you should water the root of the tree. You should fix the data. And then not only will you fix this brown branch, you'll fix all the brown branches, right? They're all be green.
Well, I think I now have to tell
analogy.
my favorite bad data in, bad data out story, which is the Google pizza glue story from about 18 months ago. So what happened was Google signed a deal with Reddit to have Reddit provide it with training data. And someone somewhere asked Google how to prevent cheese from sliding off of a pizza. And the response that Google gave was you can put glue on your pizza to stop the cheese coming off. And that came from a Reddit thread from about 10 years ago. And it was like a running Reddit joke that had been around for ages. But because of the way that the Google AI overview worked, and it's such a rare question for someone to ask, like how to stop cheese from sliding off the pizza. Yeah. That is what came back. And of course, Google came up with some excuse for why it happened. But I always use that as an example because it's just such a good example of like you put stupid data in and that's what the output is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, AI does not detect sarcasm very well, right? Again, it's not magic. Predicting the next word you should use, right? And if all it has about that topic is Reddit, it's going to use it. And this is why too, like, jokes aside, like you see, why does ChatGPT act so differently than Grok and whatever, right? It's because of what it's trained on. Grok is trained on all just like Twitter data. So it's going to talk like Twitter and say things that your normal Twitter user would say.
For better or worse.
So just like take that. We've
had many conversations about Grok.
So it's exactly the same thing though, right? It's whatever goes in is what's going to come out.
Well, we're saying AI is not magic. So I want to talk about like a really positive use case, which is the Spotify Wrapped, because, counterpoint, Eric, it kind of seems like magic, but
it can. You're right. If it's done right, it can.
But tell me, why is it not magic? What is actually happening? What's the data foundation that is kind of powering a lot?
Yeah. So this is actually a really good way also to tie together what we were saying before about how AI is just another output of the same underlying data. So for Jess and I used to work, there was a blog that we did a couple years ago about Spotify Wrapped, when everyone was, starting to get Spotify Wrapped, and they were saying like, "Oh, this is so great, this is so smart," that everyone loved it, right? And that seemed kind of like magic at the time, right? And that was really what our blog was about. It was a little about how it seemed like it was probably pretty easy for them to do from a data modeling side, because the things that they would say in this whole big long wrapped email were things like, your favorite artist was this, and your favorite genre was this, and you were a lot like people who listen to this and whatever, right? And it was a lot of things that would be very easy from a well structured model of how you're listening went around. And so the point of the article was basically that like they made it look like magic and look great, but this was because they had done that extra 5 minutes. Remember before when we said, what can you do for 5 minutes that'll make you happy 6 months later? Maybe they spent 10 minutes thinking over their data model, and now they're like, now we can do Spotify Wrapped.
Right.
So that wasn't AI, right? That was just kind of basic data modeling stuff. But now recently, Spotify DJ has come out.
Yeah.
If any of your listeners have used that, so the use case that I had as the big joke at the place where we work is that everyone knows that my kids have taken over my Spotify account, right? So, Spotify DJ, if you're unfamiliar, will basically just try to be like a regular DJ. It's an AI voice, and one of the things it said the other day was it said, "All right, we're going to play you some Blackpink," because I have a 11-year-old girl, and it said, "We're going to play you some Blackpink because you were in the top 1% of Blackpink listeners in the past month." And I was like,
and that's actually quite an achievement when you think about how many Blackpink fans there are out there in the world.
It is. But the immediate thing I thought of while my daughter was like screaming with joy in the back seat, the first thing I thought of was like, oh, that's exactly how they did Spotify Wrapped too. Like they just took an insight based on the fact, and this was an easy insight for them to gather because of the sort of background data structure.
Yeah, great analogy. I mean, it's in some ways it's very, like you said, a very simple data structure. You're just counting and summing up, what people are listening to, and then comparing them against how often you listen to it versus how other people listen to it. Very simple data structure, but then layering AI on top, giving it that, obviously the AI interface is quite, powerful, but giving AI access to the proper information of what you are listening to, how you compare to other users, creates this really interesting conversation for yourself around the fact that you're like a huge Blackpink, and simple data structure, really powerful on the other side. Versus if you didn't have that data structure and you weren't capturing that, you wouldn't be able to do that comparison to give you the insight of you're in the top 1%.
Yeah. And it's funny too, going back to the beginning, when you mentioned how AI is pretty good at working with unstructured data. In some cases, it can be, for sure. But if the AI DJ just had like a whole bunch of English sentences that said like, Eric's daughter listened to this thing today, and then had to make those comparisons for itself, it would take a lot longer. It would be harder to get those insights. So here's also where one of the big things I say about AI in general is that like you could let AI do like 80% of the hard stuff, and a human is still doing like the 20% of the common sense stuff, right? So sometimes in this case, the common sense stuff was just structuring the data in a way that made it easy for AI to sort of parse it, be able to come up with something like that. I bet if it just had like a bunch of event logs of every play on Spotify in the past month across every user in the world, it would not have been able to confidently say, you're 1% of Blackpink listeners.
Or also from a like real time component, if it was having to sort through all of those logs and look at the unstructured data, it wouldn't be able to give you real time information as you're listening to things.
Sure.
But I think one of the things that I just like about that Spotify example is that I think it just breaks it down and kind of, it's like anyone could do. And we actually have started to see this. I've got a Peloton membership. I absolutely get like a Peloton Wrapped at the end of the year now. Everyone is starting to do these sorts of end of year roundups because actually from a data perspective, it's not crazy difficult. And actually, our listeners could do their own. If you've got that data, you could do your own version as well. It's just purely whether or not you've got that data.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like this as maybe a takeaway for our audience. We'll do an in-stream takeaway, which is maybe look at your systems and the data you have based on what Eric's been talking about, event tables, triggers, things that you're capturing, and try to see if there's a way that by the end of this year, you could do a wrapped version. You could give that back to your users, your customers, and say, this is how much you consumed this year. This is how you might be similar to other people that are in, similar verticals or benchmarks or stuff like that. Could be a really great way to engage your audience around what they've been doing. And I'm sure the benefit of all of this is that you show people what they're doing, they might end up doing a little bit more and interacting with you more and engaging, which is what we all are, going for.
And there's two ways this can go, I think, too, right? Which is also instructive, right? One way is that it's a forcing function, and you say like, oh, maybe our data is not actually structured in such a way that we should, like, maybe we should take a step back, think about how to restructure this, maybe build some views or data models that are going to support this, and then we're going to be able to do this going forward and do better. And another way is that at the end of the year, you're like, oh no, we got to do this thing, right? And we scramble and just have data engineers and analytics engineers write all these like ad hoc queries, like 1,000 of them, and be like, okay, fine, we ship this thing. And you can never do that again unless you do the whole scrambling again. And then you've created tech debt, right? That's sort of circling back to like, what is tech debt? And that's a great example. You built this thing that's just not sustainable. So yeah, and I'm sure that, a lot of the companies doing these wrap things now are probably, some are doing both ways.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Eric, this is our favorite feature to do in the podcast. We call it AI Gone Wrong. So why don't you tell us about your favorite AI Gone Wrong story that you've heard recently? Because we've heard some doozies.
Oh yeah. So I found an article not too long ago about, I think it was McDonald's was using AI to do their pre-screening. So it was one of those things where, and this is in itself like is fine. I think you have like an AI bot that's just doing the basic introductory screening with applicants to ask, the types of questions: where do you live, salary expectations, blah blah blah, all that basic stuff that like I'm sure people would probably prefer to talk to a person, but if they don't, it's not the end of the world. Anyway, so they had this chatbot, and apparently some security researchers decided like, oh, I wonder if this is secure or not. It was not. Spoiler alert. It was not. They were able to go in and extract a whole bunch of personal information, some PII, from the back end that this database was using. So you'd go to apply to McDonald's, and I don't know, maybe you had to put your address or something like that in as part of the application, and it was storing that, but I guess it was not storing it particularly securely. And so to me, this was one of those things where I think people were just thinking, oh, it's AI, it's magic, like it's fine. I'm sure it's safe. I'm sure it can't be easily hacked. But I think it was like they just put in like the password and it worked or something like that.
I mean, this just seems like an immediate GDPR violation. Like I can see, I can see the GDPR sirens going off in my head. Wow, that's a pretty bad one. So the moral of the story is make sure that your AI is, or a chatbot or anything is secure, even if you are, even if you think that it's magic.
Absolutely.
I think the deeper moral too is that this is just another example of people forgetting the data basics because the word AI is in something. They're just like, oh, it's magic, I don't have to do anything, right? You've got to, just because AI is your end product and is your customer interface, it's just the same as if your customer interface was a dashboard. You still have to do the same things.
And to bring it back, if they had taken 5 minutes up front and thought about the downstream, they would have realized, we're about to expose a lot of PII data.
Also,
I feel like I've heard that before. I don't know.
Yeah, also never use the password. That, I mean, come on. One. Come on, guys. Basic security.
What was your Post-it analogy, Eric, that you were telling us about with
your in-laws and the password?
Yes. This was a little less about data security, but I can see why you're thinking it was about data security. This was a little bit more about I think just that everything is data. I remember having a conversation with them, trying to get them to use a password manager for various reasons, probably about, I need to log into something of yours to help you with something, blah, blah, blah. And them being like, oh, no, we don't want to do that. It's just easier if we, we write our passwords on Post-it notes. And this is, this is not to pick on them. This is more
it's
common
a common
than it should
thing.
be.
It's a common
This is
thing.
a common thing, right? But it was just back to the idea of like, that's a data point, right? Your username and password is a data point. And when you have to change it, that's an update row to that data point, right? And so some of these tools like password managers are designed to handle these kinds of things and to handle data securely. But that's just another example of like a process now. And now if, for whatever reason, they say, oh, I need your help with something, I can't just be like, oh, let me just check our shared 1Password and take care of it for you. Now it's like, oh, I got to find the book. All right, here it is. Oh, wait, that's the old sticky note, right? So it's just the whole same
Oh
thing
my
about
God.
data process, data collection, data
Yeah.
point creation, and management.
So Eric, just to kind of to bring it home, talking about the different, components we talked about, shift left, data hygiene, how was this Spotify Wrapped and then now DJ, how have they been able to basically take advantage of clean data so they could adopt a lot of these AI tools faster and more effectively?
I mean, I think it's just the fact that they did it, right? They were able to do it. But as we said before, all these companies are copying Spotify with Unwrapped, right? No one
Mhm,
no one invented it. They said, "Oh, Spotify did this thing. Everyone loved it. We should do it."
mhm.
Spotify was able to do it first because their data structures enabled them to do it first. And
Yeah.
now DJ, was just another thing. They probably had some product person in a room that said, like, "Oh, you know what? We could do this thing using AI because we have our data, very well
Mhm,
structured." And they said, "Okay, cool." And it really just allows you to do any sort of AI stuff or any data stuff. Again, like remember,
mhm,
AI is just another data product. So any data product is going to be um, monumentally easier to execute with easy to
mhm.
use data.
And to kind of bring that home by successfully having clean data, by using AI in a novel way that people hadn't, they kind of did it first. There's probably a lot of different options for that. I think when they first launched it, it went viral. So if you're thinking about, okay, data is great for my performance and I can track my business performance and why that's really interesting, you might be missing this other opportunity, which I think the Spotify Wrapped and DJ identifies so well, which is you can use it to actually engage with your customers and your users and create a whole conversation around your data and really talk about, data isn't just about looking at performance. It's also about like how you can look at engagement with your users and how you can actually give something that's really interesting to, the people that you deal with every day in all of your customer interactions.
We could do a whole nother podcast too about the role of data within companies and it being a cost center versus a value generator and how it's measured and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the you could do a lot of data modeling exercises and a lot of
Mhm,
time just like cleaning and making your databases and your data models and structures uh,
mhm,
better. That isn't necessarily going to have like an ROI on it that day.
mhm.
And that's what people I think struggle with. They don't realize that like, oh, but actually tomorrow when I come up with this idea, we're going to be able to do this a lot faster and a lot better.
Yeah, because obviously, definitely things come down to ROI a lot of the time. And I think that's a great thing to point out that setting up your data today may not see ROI until a little bit later, but it can have
Mm.
some massive outsized benefits to you down the road.
So that was our interview with Eric Callahan. That was so insightful, and we're really thrilled to have him join us again. We'll definitely bring him back on again in the future because honestly, I think
Mhm.
both you and I could talk data with him for hours. It is now time for AI News of the Week, and we actually have a pretty significant update to one of the stories that we covered last week. And then we also have a really interesting development from Albania that shows that AI adoption is happening in some really unexpected places.
Right. Yeah. First up, the $1.5 billion settlement we told you about last week between Anthropic and, authors of copyright infringement. Well, Jess, plot twist, a
Oh,
judge just rejected it.
ooh, right. So the federal judge ruled that the proposed settlement was inadequate and didn't provide enough protection for the author's interest. This is actually a really big deal because it was
Mhm.
set to be the largest copyright recovery in US history.
Yeah, and it probably means that the legal battle is going to continue. And maybe Anthropic was about to get, a bit of a deal or a steal, if you will.
I think that's
And
right.
we're probably looking at a scenario where an even bigger settlement is coming down the road. So for our audience here, this reinforces what we said last week. Budget for those 30 to 50% AI price increases over the next 18 months, maybe even sooner as Anthropic starts to model out what that big settlement might look like. Because I think these legal costs, you're going to have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, we did say they just had that $13.5 billion investment round, but I doubt those VC investors want most of that money going to settlement. So it's probably going to get passed to the consumer.
And what was really interesting is we put this story on TikTok and there were some very interesting comments, and kind of the general consensus is because it was supposed to be $3,000 per author for, I think it was 500,000 works. And the general consensus is that that just wasn't enough, which I agree with, because not only should they be compensated retroactively for their past work, but there's got to be some sort of licensing deal worked out, like we're
Mhm.
starting to see with the publishers, where they're getting paid for their work going forward. Because we know that running out of training data is quickly becoming an issue.
Yeah.
So, $3,000 per book was just not enough. So I'm actually in favor of this.
Well, that's a great point, because if you think about it, Anthropic and all of these, big AI companies, they're going to continue to make money year after year after year off of that training data.
Exactly.
So, where is the compensation for those authors for that content that's being used and, recouping money year in, year out? Maybe, uh, maybe what we just identified is there's going to have to be a rev share agreement as, authors continue to get paid for their work going forward.
I think that's probably not what the AI companies want to hear, but I think that that's probably what's going to end up happening. So good job to the judge for pushing back on this, because I agree with him. I think that this is the right move for sure.
Now, for something completely different and honestly pretty wild, Albania just became the first country in the world to appoint an AI advisor to their government cabinet.
And we're not just talking like a person who will act as an expert on AI. We were talking about an actual AI advisor. The name is Diella, or DIELLA, which stands for Digital Innovation and Excellence Leading Albanian Advancement. It's an AI bot that has been given the official title of Honorary Advisor for Innovation in Digital Governance. And they did actually have a swearing-in ceremony. I kind of want to see some video of that.
I know what stood in place for the bot, to
I'm
basically get sworn
really
in.
curious about this one.
I definitely did a double take on this. When I saw
Yeah.
AI advisor, I thought, oh, this is great. An advisor, to the cabinet, just like you would have a, Secretary of State, something like that. But
Not in
no,
that way.
it's an actual AI bot. I mean, maybe we really are on the way of the future, but I
Ugh.
really have so many questions. I mean, first and foremost, the silly one, does the AI get a government salary? Does it have a pension?
Yes.
But more importantly, does it have voting rights? Can it be impeached? What level of accountability exists for this AI advisor? Like, there's a whole set of laws and governance that we have to think about now that that we've already done for humans. Now we have to do for bots.
Absolutely. So, according to the announcement, Diella will help streamline government services, analyze policy data, and provide recommendations for digital transformation initiatives. It's designed to make the government more efficient and accessible to citizens.
Yeah, and from a business perspective, it's really fascinating because it shows, I think, that AI is moving from experimental to operational in a lot of major institutions. This is now something that's set into law and happening. Albania is essentially using AI as a strategic advisor for an entire country's digital infrastructure.
Honestly, I don't love this. I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think there's some real accountability issues. You'd really need to nail any potential issues with hallucinations or, anything like that. Like, it just doesn't feel like we are at that place where the consistency. I mean, we saw it the other week with the Taco Bell chatbot,
Yeah.
right? Like, imagine imagine the Taco Bell chatbot, but for the government. This just seems like a recipe for disaster.
This is, my analogy here would be going from 0 to 60 in a car, right?
Exactly. You know how we keep talking about, that headline, the 95% of AI pilots fail? This is exactly that, right? Jumping in too quickly,
Yes.
maybe work on getting the foundations in place before you create an AI advisor.
I think they needed to go back to Sean's episode of, frameworks and AI policy and guidance. They probably did need an AI advisor, a human, to advise on AI infrastructure. And maybe they could have worked towards, implementing an AI bot that is responsible for strategic guidance. But I think it raises some really important questions about transparency and accountability. How do you audit an AI advisor's recommendations? They've been put in this somewhat senior position. Who's providing oversight to that? Who has the experience to provide oversight? How do you ensure it's not biased? We talk about biases all the time.
Yep.
Again, if it doesn't have oversight, how does that get handled? These are all of the same questions we've been asking time and time again. If someone wants to implement AI in their operations, how are you properly managing all of that?
And I think it's actually the perfect example of why we always emphasize human oversight, because even if the AI advisor is the most sophisticated chatbot that's ever existed, there's there's still going to need to be humans reviewing the recommendations before they become policy. Like and you absolutely have to have that same approach in your business. Before we wrap up, we just wanted to quickly recap the key takeaways from our conversation today, because we kind of discussed them in the interview.
Yeah, first and most importantly, identify your duct tape solution. So Eric's analogy was perfect. If you're doing manual processes that aren't scalable, if you're constantly exporting to Excel, or if you find yourself thinking, no human should have to do this, you've probably got some technical debt that needs addressing.
As we discussed with Eric, having a duct tape solution isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes you do need to move fast and get something working sooner rather than later, but you need to realize that and recognize it for what it is, and then have a plan to fix them before they become massive problems down the road, so you don't end up in a situation where you just keep, putting duct tape on something and then it spirals.
Absolutely. And Eric's point about data hygiene was crucial. He's preaching to the choir to me, but it's something that I've experienced time and time again. So I've really felt this pain point. So I want to reiterate how crucial it is. It's not sexy, but it is essential. So when you have John Smith, J. Smith, John S. and John No Space Smith, or John _ Smith, or the list goes on. It's all referring to the same person. That's a data hygiene problem that's going to bite you when you're trying to implement AI.
Yeah. And I also really loved Eric's reminder that AI is not magic. It's just another output of your data.
Mm-hmm.
AI is just another data tool, like a dashboard or like a report. And if your data foundation is weak, everything that's built on top of it will be weak too. The old principle of garbage in, garbage out is more relevant than ever with AI. And it's going to show if you're putting garbage data in.
The Spotify example was brilliant because it shows how getting your data foundation right enables you to move fast when opportunities arise. A Spotify Wrap seemed like magic to users, but it was really just good data modeling from the beginning. They had a great data foundation, which enabled them to do a lot more down the road. So now they can launch new AI features like Spotify DJ because they have that solid foundation.
Yeah, they really did the best job in just getting that solid data foundation right. And that's what happens when you are a digitally native company from day one. They were a data company from day one, and that's how they thought about it. And that's why they were able to take that data and use it in really interesting customer facing ways that you normally wouldn't be able to look at.
So the practical homework from Eric's interview: audit one data source this week. Look for those manual processes, those duct tape solutions, those data hygiene issues. Ask yourself Eric's fundamental question: what business question am I trying to answer? And then see if you can take 5 minutes to prevent a problem at the source instead of constantly having to fix it downstream. And maybe even a little more fun, have a think about how you could implement a Spotify Wrapped for this year.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. If you have, something where people are coming to a studio frequently, whatever, you can keep track of that. You do keep track of that. That is data. And that is how you could have your own version of Spotify Wrapped for the year. And, remember, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but if you fix your data today, it might not show immediate ROI, but it really positions you to take advantage of AI opportunities much faster when the opportunity arises. And the companies that will win with AI aren't necessarily the ones with the most data. Like, you can have too much data where it's not actually worthwhile. The companies that are going to win with AI are the ones with the cleanest, most thoughtfully structured data, because then they're going to be able to take advantage of it the most.
Right. That wraps up another episode of Early Adopter. So if you made it through both parts of Eric's data masterclass, you're seriously ahead of the curve when it comes to AI readiness.
Absolutely. The practical frameworks that Eric shared, starting with his business questions, mapping your data lifecycle, and then implementing that shift left methodology, that's all really actionable stuff that you can do today, and it will really make a difference in how your business handles data, and that means how you handle AI.
And most importantly, you don't need to be a data scientist to implement these ideas. Just ask yourself, what business question am I trying to answer? And how can I collect this data in a way that makes answering that question easier?
And speaking of taking action, if you are looking for more early adopter content beyond just your weekly podcast fix, we are all over social media. We're at early_adopter on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice and leave us a great review, or just start asking us some questions. We'd love to, answer those wherever you find your podcast. It genuinely makes a huge difference for helping other business owners find us. So this has been Early Adopter. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Jess. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week.
Bye, Jess.
Bye, Kyle.